The massive flagship of the Galactic Empire cut through the darkness of space like a predator, its armored hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. On the command bridge, Grand Admiral Forlag stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. His exoskeletal ridges, a mark of high status among the Galactic, caught the blue glow of the tactical displays surrounding him. "Status report," Forlag demanded, his deep voice resonating through the command center. "The human settlement on Cygnus X-1 is within range, Grand Admiral," replied his second-in-command, Commander Zeth. "Our sensors confirm minimal defensive capabilities. Primarily a research outpost with civilian population centers." Forlag's mouth twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. "Excellent. The humans have been expanding too confidently along our borders. They need to be reminded of their place in this galaxy. The Galactic Empire had ruled hundreds of star systems with an iron fist for centuries. Their society was built on principles of strength and domination. The strong had not just the right, but the obligation to conquer the weak. It was, as their philosophers said, the natural order of things. And in this natural order, the Galactic saw themselves as the apex predators of the galaxy. The Human Alliance, in contrast, was a relatively new power. They had emerged from their home system only a century ago, expanding cautiously but steadily, establishing colonies and forging alliances with other species. Their technological advancement had been impressive, but their military might was nothing compared to the Galactic war machine. "They've been refusing our ultimatums for too long," Forlag continued, studying the holographic display of the human settlement. "They believe their diplomatic relationships with the Federated Worlds will protect them. It's time to correct that misconception." Commander Zeth hesitated before speaking. "Grand Admiral, intelligence reports suggest the humans have been unusually active in upgrading their defense networks in other sectors. Perhaps. Are you suggesting we should fear them?" Forlag's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "No, Grand Admiral," Zeth quickly answered. "I merely suggest caution. The humans have proven adaptable in past conflicts. Adaptability is meaningless against overwhelming force." Forlag dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "Prepare the bombardment. Use the restricted weapons." A murmur ran through the bridge officers. The restricted weapons referred to mass destruction devices prohibited by galactic treaties, treaties the Galactic had refused to sign. "The prohibited warheads, sir?" Zeth asked, seeking confirmation. "Did I stutter, Commander?" Forlag's eyes narrowed. "This will be a demonstration of what happens when lesser species forget their place. Begin the attack." Hours later, Forlag watched with satisfaction as the orbital bombardment transformed the surface of Cygnus X-1 into a hellscape. The restricted weapons, engineered bioweapons, and atmosphere-igniting plasma cascades did their work with horrifying efficiency. Reports indicated millions of human casualties, with the death toll rising by the minute. "Transmission incoming from the Human Alliance," announced the communications officer. "Priority channel." Forlag straightened his uniform. "Put it through. Let's hear their surrender." The holographic display shifted, and the face of a human woman appeared. Ambassador Ilera Vance was known throughout diplomatic circles for her sharp intellect and unflappable demeanor. Even now, faced with the genocide of her people, her expression remained eerily calm, almost cold. "Grand Admiral Forlag," she said, her voice steady. "I'm speaking on behalf of the Human Alliance." "Ambassador Vance," Forlag replied with mock civility. "I trust you're calling to discuss terms of surrender? Your outpost on Cygnus X-1 has been neutralized, and my fleet stands ready to continue to your core worlds. Unconditional submission will spare your species further suffering." The ambassador's gaze somehow seemed to penetrate through the transmission, looking directly into Forlag's soul. When she spoke, her words were measured, deliberate. "Grand Admiral, perhaps you misunderstand. Humans don't negotiate with murderers." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Forlag staring at an empty screen. For a moment, Silence hung over the command bridge. Then Forelag burst into laughter. Such arrogance. They face extinction, yet they posture as if they hold the upper hand. Yet beneath his dismissive tone, there was a faint disquiet. The human's response had been unexpected. Not panic, not pleading, but a cold declaration that somehow felt like a threat. Set course for the Sol system, Forelag ordered. If they wish to be obliterated rather than subjugated, we shall oblige them. As the massive fleet of the Karthak Empire shifted its vector toward Earth, none aboard noticed the small, stealth probes that had been monitoring their every move, transmitting data back to human space through subspace channels the Karthak couldn't detect. In the darkness between stars, humanity was already responding. The Karthak assault fleet approached the Sol system with overwhelming confidence. Nearly 300 warships, from nimble destroyers to planet-cracking dreadnoughts, moved in perfect formation toward the cradle of humanity. On the flagship, Grand Admiral Forelag reviewed the battle plans with his senior officers. Our intelligence suggests their defensive capabilities are concentrated around Earth and Mars, Forelag explained, gesturing to the tactical display. A direct assault would be costly. Instead, we'll establish control of the outer system first, then advance methodically. Admiral, asked one of his strategists, what about the human response to Cygnus X-1? Should we expect unconventional tactics? Forelag dismissed the concern. The humans' defiance is empty. They have no choice but to meet us in conventional battle, and in that arena, our superiority is absolute. As the Karthak fleet crossed the heliopause and entered the Sol system proper, they encountered no resistance. The outer planets and their moons showed minimal defensive installations, most of which powered down as the Karthak approached, seemingly abandoned. They're retreating to their core worlds, Forelag concluded, pleased. Their resolve is already breaking. Commander Zeth frowned at his sensor readings. Sir, I'm detecting unusual energy fluctuations throughout the system, and our long-range reconnaissance drones have gone silent. Interference from the system star? Most likely, Forelag said. Nothing to concern us. The fleet continued its advance, passing the orbit of Neptune, then Uranus. Still no sign of human resistance. Some of the junior officers began to joke about humans hiding under their beds. It was as they approached the asteroid belt that things began to go wrong. First came communication disruptions, minor glitches that spread across the fleet like a virus. Then navigation systems began reporting conflicting data. Weapons targeting systems flickered on and off unpredictably. Status report, Forelag demanded as the bridge lighting on his flagship fluctuated. Sir, we're experiencing system-wide failures, reported the chief engineer, panic edging into his voice. Our networks are being compromised by an unknown attack vector. Impossible, Forelag growled. Our cybersecurity is impenetrable. Not to us, came a voice from behind him. Forelag spun around to face a figure that shouldn't have been there, a human in form-fitting combat armor, face obscured by a visored helmet. Before Forelag or his officers could react, the intruder activated something on their wrist, and every Karthak on the bridge found themselves paralyzed, locked in place by their own powered armor. What is this? Forelag managed to ask, his mandibles struggling to form words as his exoskeleton suit stiffened around him. The figure removed their helmet, revealing a human with intense eyes and a face marked by old scars. Commander Kai, Ghost Division, Human Alliance Special Forces, they introduced themselves with cold formality. Your networks haven't been secure for decades, Admiral. We've had backdoors in your systems since our first contact. More armored humans materialized on the bridge, seemingly appearing from nowhere as advanced stealth technology deactivated. They moved with lethal efficiency, securing the command center. How did you board our vessels? Forelag demanded, still struggling against his immobilized armor. Kai approached, studying the Karthak Admiral with clinical detachment. We've been here the whole time. Your arrogance made us invisible. You never bothered to develop countermeasures for technology you deemed beneath you. Throughout the fleet, similar scenes were unfolding. The elite Ghost units, genetically enhanced human special forces equipped with cutting-edge stealth and combat technology, had infiltrated every major vessel before the fleet even entered the Sol system. They moved like shadows through the ships, disabling critical systems and neutralizing command staff. "My family was on Cygnus X-1, Kai said, voice devoid of emotion. 3,700,000 civilians. Researchers, teachers, children. All dead because you want to make a point." Forlag's eyes widened. "This is impossible. Your primitive species couldn't possibly." "Primitive?" One of Kai's team laughed bitterly. "We've been studying you for 50 years. Every weakness, every blind spot, every assumption that makes you vulnerable." Kai accessed the flagship's communication system and transmitted a fleet-wide message using Forlag security codes. "This is Grand Admiral Forlag. All vessels are to power down weapons systems and maintain position. Further instructions will follow. Any deviation from these orders will be considered an act of treason." Across the fleet, confused Kaarthak officers complied with what they believed were legitimate orders from their commander. Within hours, the mighty invasion force had effectively neutralized itself. Kai turned back to the immobilized Forlag. "Now, Admiral, you're going to learn what happens when you murder humans." For the first time in his long military career, Grand Admiral Forlag felt fear. The detention chamber was sparse, but comfortable, a far cry from the barbaric prison Forlag had expected. The walls were a neutral white, the furnishings minimal but ergonomically adapted for Kaarthak physiology. There were no visible guards, though Forlag had no doubt he was under constant surveillance. When the door finally opened, Ambassador Ilara Vance entered, accompanied by two humans in formal attire. She took a seat across from Forlag, her posture relaxed but alert. "Grand Admiral," she greeted him, as if they were meeting at a diplomatic function rather than an interrogation. "I trust you've been treated well." Forlag stared at her with undisguised contempt. "Spare me your pretense of civility, Ambassador. What do you intend to do with me and my fleet?" "That depends largely on you," Vance replied. "But first, I believe some context would be beneficial. You seem to be operating under several critical misunderstandings about humanity." She activated a holographic display between them, showing star charts and military movements spanning decades. "What you experienced was not a desperate last stand or a lucky counterattack," Vance explained. "It was the implementation of what we call the Vance Doctrine, a strategic approach developed after our first encounters with expansionist empires like yours." The display showed historical recordings of earlier conflicts, smaller in scale, but similar in nature to the current crisis. "We realized early on that we could never match the raw military power of established galactic empires," Vance continued. "So we chose a different path. Instead of building massive fleets to counter yours, we invested in asymmetric capabilities, stealth technology, cyber warfare, elite special forces, and, most importantly, intelligence networks." Forlag's eyes narrowed as he studied the data. "You've been preparing for this conflict specifically." "Not specifically, but inevitably," Vance corrected. "The Kaarthak Empire isn't unique in its attitudes towards supposedly lesser species. You're simply the most recent empire to make the mistake of attacking us." She changed the display to show detailed schematics of Kaarthak military vessels, including classified designs that Forlag knew had never been shared outside the highest levels of the empire. "For decades, we've had operatives throughout your empire," Vance explained. "They've identified vulnerabilities in your technology, gathered intelligence on your military doctrine, and prepared countermeasures for every advantage you thought you possessed." "Impossible," Forlag whispered, though the evidence before him suggested otherwise. "The massacre at Cygnus X-1 didn't provoke our response, Admiral. It merely activated contingency plans that were already in place." Vance's voice hardened slightly. "We knew exactly who you were long before you revealed it to the galaxy." One of Vance's aides stepped forward, presenting a data tablet. "These are our terms. The Kaarthak Empire will withdraw from all occupied territories within 20 light-years of human space. You will pay substantial reparations for the destruction of Cygnus X-1. Most importantly, you, Grand Admiral, will publicly acknowledge responsibility for the massacre and submit to justice for crimes against sentient beings. Forlag scanned the document, his rage building. And if I refuse? If the Empire refuses? This isn't a negotiation, Vance said simply. The condition of your fleet should make that clear. Every vessel in your armada has been compromised. The same technology that allowed us to disable your ships could just as easily destroy them, and has been deployed throughout Kaorthak space by our operatives. She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. When I said humans don't negotiate with murderers, I meant it. These aren't terms for discussion. They're the conditions for your empire's continued existence. For the first time, Forlag began to comprehend the true meaning behind the ambassador's seemingly simple statement. It wasn't emotional defiance or empty bravado. It was a fundamental principle, a line that humanity refused to cross. You expect the Empire to simply capitulate because of one defeated fleet? Forlag asked, though with less conviction than before. No, Vance replied. We expect rational beings to recognize reality. Your military advantages have been neutralized. Your strategic secrets are compromised. And your leadership, she gestured to, Forlag, is in our custody. She stood to leave. Consider our terms carefully, Admiral. The transmission of your public statement has been scheduled for tomorrow. The galaxy will be watching. As the door closed behind her, Forlag sat motionless, confronting the possibility that everything he had believed about the natural order of the galaxy and his empire's place in it had been catastrophically wrong. The transmission of Grand Admiral Forlag's confession sent shockwaves through the Kaorthak Empire. Across hundreds of worlds, Kaorthak citizens watched as one of their most decorated military leaders admitted to ordering the massacre at Cygnus X, and accepted the humans' terms of surrender. For a species that venerated strength above all, watching their Grand Admiral submit to a supposedly inferior species was more than humiliating. It was paradigm-shattering. In the Imperial Palace on the Kaorthak homeworld, Marshal Kale slammed his fist against the conference table, causing the other military leaders to flinch. Treason, Kale roared. Forlag has betrayed everything the Empire stands for. He must have been coerced, drugged, or worse. General Thrix, older and more cautious than his colleagues, studied the replay of Forlag's transmission. His statement contained verification codes only Forlag would know, and the humans have released technical data confirming their claims about our fleet's capture. You suggest we accept defeat? Kale demanded, his upper mandibles flaring in threat display. I suggest we consider the possibility that we have gravely underestimated the humans, Thrix replied carefully. If their capabilities are even half what they claim. Impossible, interrupted Admiral Vrex. No species could infiltrate our security to such a degree. These must be bluffs designed to prevent us from launching a proper counterattack. The debate raged for hours, ultimately splitting the military leadership into two factions. Those who advocated immediate retaliation against the humans, led by Marshal Kale, and those who counseled caution and compliance with the terms, led by General Thrix. The division quickly spread beyond the military. Political leaders, industrial magnates, and regional governors began taking sides. Within days, the fractures had deepened into open conflict, with military units declaring loyalty to one faction or the other. Marshal Kale's hardliners struck first, seizing control of key strategic installations and declaring General Thrix and his supporters traitors to the Empire. Planetary defense forces were ordered to align themselves with Kale's faction or face orbital bombardment. On the outlying Kaorthak colony of Vesh Prime, Junior Officer Lyra found herself caught in the escalating civil conflict. Her unit had been ordered to suppress a civilian protest against Marshal Kale's faction, civilians who supported complying with the human terms to avoid further conflict. "We have our orders," Commander Drex told the assembled troops. "These dissidents threaten the security of the Empire. Use whatever force necessary to disperse them." Lyra had joined the military to protect the Empire, not to fire on its citizens. As the unit moved into position overlooking the central plaza where thousands of Kaorthak civilians had gathered, she felt her conviction wavering. The protesters were ordinary citizens, teachers, engineers, service workers. They carried signs with messages like peace is strength and truth before pride, sentiments that would have been unthinkable in Karthak society just weeks ago. When Commander Drex gave the order to fire warning shots, Lyra hesitated, her weapon lowered. Beside her, several other young officers showed similar reluctance. Officer Lyra, Drex snapped, comply immediately or face charges of insubordination. In that moment, Lyra made her choice. Instead of firing on the civilians, she turned her weapon on Commander Drex. No, sir. I won't participate in this madness. Her action sparked a chain reaction. Other hesitant officers followed her lead, and within minutes, what was supposed to be a crowd suppression operation had turned into a standoff between factions within the same military unit. Similar scenes played out across Karthak space as the Empire tore itself apart from within. Each confrontation forced individuals to choose between the traditional values of strength through domination and the emerging recognition that those values had led them to catastrophic defeat. Unknown to most Karthak, human ghost operatives were actively exacerbating the conflict, providing intelligence to moderate factions, disrupting hardliner communications, and occasionally eliminating the most dangerous extremists. They operated with surgical precision, ensuring that the Karthak civil conflict remained focused on internal issues rather than redirecting against external enemies. As the weeks passed, Marshal Kale's hardline faction began losing ground. Their aggressive tactics alienated civilian populations, while their increasingly desperate military actions led to high casualties among their own forces. Reports of Kale ordering attacks on Karthak's civilian targets, justified as punishing traitor populations, further eroded his support. Lyra, now a reluctant symbol of the moderate faction, found herself working alongside several high-ranking officers who had defected from Kale's side. Together, they coordinated a plan to capture the Marshal and end the civil war. Our intelligence suggests Kale is directing operations from the Nexus station in the Draxus system, explained Admiral Korn, a recent defector. His forces are stretched thin, defending multiple fronts. This may be our opportunity to end this conflict. Lyra studied the tactical display. His personal guard will be formidable. Yes, but we have something they don't, Korn replied, gesturing to a shadowy figure who stepped forward from the corner of the room. Lyra tensed as she recognized the distinctive armor of a human ghost operative. The human nodded respectfully. Officer Lyra, the ghost greeted her. I'm Operative Echo. My team has been monitoring Marshal Kale's movements and security protocols. We can help you reach him. Why would humans help us with our internal conflict? Lyra asked suspiciously. Stability, Echo answered simply. A Karthak empire consumed by civil war is unpredictable and dangerous to everyone, including us. We prefer a stable neighbor who respects boundaries to a chaotic one that might lash out in desperation. The operation to capture Marshal Kale was planned for 3 standard days later. A small strike force would infiltrate Nexus Station, bypassing the bulk of Kale's forces by using access codes provided by the human operatives. Lyra would lead the actual capture team, comprising herself and 5 elite Karthak soldiers. The mission almost failed before it began. As they approached Nexus Station in a disguised transport, a loyalist patrol ship intercepted them. A tense moment followed as the patrol demanded their identification and clearance codes. Just as it seemed they would be discovered, all communications from the patrol ship suddenly ceased. The vessel drifted, its systems apparently disabled. What happened? Lyra asked, bewildered. Operative Echo, monitoring from a cloaked human vessel nearby, responded through their secure channel. Electronic countermeasures. They'll be offline for approximately 15 minutes. I suggest you proceed quickly. The infiltration went smoothly until they reached the central command hub. There, Marshal Kale was waiting with a dozen elite guards, weapons ready. I knew traitors would come eventually, Kale snarled. I didn't expect it would be a lowly officer leading them. His eyes narrowed as he studied Lyra. You represent everything that has gone wrong with our empire weakness masquerading as enlightenment. "It's over, Marshal," Lyra replied, her weapon steady. "Your faction is losing on every front. Surrender now and prevent more Kaarthak deaths." Kale laughed bitterly. "Surrender? Like Forlag? I would rather die as a true Kaarthak than live as a human puppet." What happened next occurred so quickly that Lyra could barely process it. Marshal Kale raised his weapon to fire, but before he could pull the trigger, he stiffened and collapsed, a tiny dart protruding from his neck. Around him, his guards dropped one by one, each neutralized with the same clinical efficiency. Echo decloaked near the entrance to the chamber, a dart projector in hand. "Sorry for the intervention," the human said, "but we calculated a 78% probability of casualties among your team if we allowed the confrontation to proceed naturally." Lyra stared at the unconscious form of Marshal Kale, then at the human operative. "Is he dead?" "Sedated," Echo corrected. "He'll stand trial for his crimes against both humans and Kaarthak. The narcotic will keep him compliant until then." With Kale's capture, the hardliner faction rapidly collapsed. Within weeks, a provisional government formed from moderate military leaders and civilian representatives took control of the Kaarthak Empire. Their first official act was to formally accept the terms imposed by the Human Alliance. The once mighty Kaarthak Empire would never be the same. 20 years after the fall of Marshal Kale, the galaxy had changed profoundly. The Kaarthak Empire no longer existed as a unified entity, having fragmented into multiple successor states. Some had embraced reform and joined the broader galactic community, while others maintained isolation, clinging to traditional values. On the neutral world of Lyria, named for the officer whose actions had helped end the Civil War, an elderly Kaarthak sat alone on the terrace of a modest dwelling overlooking a calm sea. Though years had softened his once imposing frame, there was no mistaking the distinctive facial ridges of former Grand Admiral Forlak. After serving his sentence for war crimes, a decade of restricted freedom during which he had been required to assist in reconstruction efforts on human worlds, Forlag had chosen exile rather than return to Kaarthak space. Here, on this quiet world at the galaxy's edge, he had found an unexpected peace. The sound of approaching footsteps drew his attention. A young being, neither human nor Kaarthak, but an Ahiri, one of the newer spacefaring species, approached his terrace. "Grand Admiral Forlag?" the visitor asked tentatively. "Just Forlag now," the old Kaarthak corrected. "I surrendered that title long ago, along with much else." "You must be the historian who contacted me." "Yes, sir. Tala Nem, from the Galactic Historical Institute." The Nahiri set up a small recording device. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Your perspective on the collapse of the Kaarthak Empire is invaluable to our archives." Forlag gestured to a second chair. "What specifically brings you to my door?" "That history has been thoroughly documented. I'm researching the psychological turning points of the conflict," Tala explained. "One phrase keeps appearing in the records. Humans don't negotiate with murderers. Ambassador Vance's statement to you before the Battle of Sol. I'm trying to understand its significance." Forlag was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I misunderstood that phrase when I first heard it," he finally said, "as did the entire Empire." "How so?" Tala prompted. "We interpreted it as a declaration of war, a defiant but ultimately futile gesture from a species facing annihilation." Forlag's mandibles twitched in what might have been a sad smile. "We were wrong. It wasn't a threat or a boast. It was a statement of moral principle." He shifted in his chair, looking out over the sea. The Kaarthak Empire was built on the belief that might determines right, that the strong naturally and rightfully dominate the weak. When we encountered resistance, our response was always to apply greater force. We couldn't conceive of a species that would refuse to negotiate not from a position of strength, but from a moral boundary that could not be crossed. So, but you're saying the humans refused negotiation on purely ethical grounds? Tala asked, clearly fascinated. "Yes, but with a critical distinction," Forlag explained. "Many species have moral codes they claim to uphold, but compromise when faced with existential threats. The humans were different. They had decided collectively that some actions, like the deliberate massacre of civilians, placed the perpetrator beyond the pale of negotiation, and they were willing to back that principle with any means necessary. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Their military response wasn't about vengeance or conquest. It was about enforcement of that moral boundary. They weren't trying to destroy us. They could have, easily, once they had control of our fleet. They were establishing consequences for crossing a line they considered absolute. How did this change galactic politics? Tala asked, recording device capturing every word. Profoundly, Forlag answered. Before the Karthak collapse, power relationships in the galaxy were relatively straightforward. Military and economic might determine influence. After, things became more complex. Species began to recognize that humans operated by different rules that made them unpredictable and potentially dangerous to those who violated their core principles. He gestured toward the stars, now becoming visible as evening approached. The phrase, "humans don't negotiate with murderers," became a diplomatic shorthand throughout the galaxy, a warning that certain actions would place you beyond the protection of conventional diplomacy. Other species began adopting similar principles, creating a new framework of galactic ethics. An internal collapse of the Karthak Empire, Tala prompted, was inevitable once that contradiction was exposed, Forlag said. Our society was built on the principle that strength justifies all actions. When we encountered a species that decisively defeated us, not through superior strength, but through a different conception of power entirely, our foundational beliefs collapsed. He turned to look directly at the young historian. The humans didn't destroy the Karthak Empire. They simply revealed its fundamental weakness, that a civilization built solely on the worship of power contains the seeds of its own destruction. Tala was silent for a moment, absorbing this perspective. If you could go back, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? Forlag gave a soft, rasping laugh. Everything, or perhaps nothing. The Empire was doomed from its inception, built on a philosophy that could not sustain itself against the complexity of a diverse galaxy. Sooner or later, we would have encountered a species like humanity that operated by rules we couldn't comprehend. As twilight deepened, Tala thanked the former admiral and prepared to leave. At the edge of the terrace, the historian paused. One last question, if I may. Do you regret your actions? Forlag looked up at the emerging stars, considering the question carefully. I regret my ignorance, he finally answered. I believed I understood the natural order of the universe, that strength was the only virtue that mattered. I was wrong. There are boundaries in the cosmos that no amount of military might can overcome. The humans understood this. It took the fall of an empire for me to learn the same lesson. After the historian departed, Forlag remained on his terrace, contemplating the stars. In the vast tapestry of the galaxy, the Karthak Empire had been a brief and brutal chapter, a cautionary tale of what happens when a civilization mistakes power for righteousness. The phrase that had signaled his empire's downfall echoed in his mind. Humans don't negotiate with murderers. Simple words that had contained a universe of meaning he had failed to comprehend until it was too late. Not a threat, but a boundary. Not a declaration of war, but a statement of principle. In the end, the true power in the galaxy had not been in warships or weapons, but in the willingness to establish moral lines that could not be crossed, and to defend those lines at any cost. It was a lesson the Karthak had learned too late, but one that had transformed the galaxy. As night fully claimed the sky, Forlag closed his eyes, finding a measure of peace in finally understanding the meaning behind those fateful words.